Let's take our Bibles this morning and turn back to the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 18. 2 Samuel, chapter 18. I want to thank those who filled in last week while I was away, those who filled in for the duties that I normally have, especially to Mr. Krishna for preaching for us last Sunday and handling God's word with care and with precision. Today we return back to our study on David's life in 2 Samuel chapter 18. Let me remind you where we've been. We've seen David, one of the greatest kings of Israel, the one that many in Israel would look back as the great king of Israel. Others would debate that perhaps it's his son Solomon who is the greatest. We've seen many of his successes, and we've seen one of his more substantial failures. We've seen the repercussions of that failure, that sin, that breach of God's command. We've seen it played out in David's family as one young son dies, a daughter is raped, a son is murdered, another son seeks to overthrow the throne and has driven David out of the city of Jerusalem into exile. We've seen him gathering his forces, hoping to make some attempt to return to Jerusalem. While at the same time, we've seen his son, Absalom, acting in ways that make him very disagreeable to his father. And by that I mean there's barely hope for reconciliation. The things that his son has done leaves very little room for reconciliation, for restitution, for restoration. We've also seen David surrounded by those who seek him good, those who seek to sustain him and support him and allow him to go on even though he's in exile. We've seen David's counselors, one who spoke only good advice, and yet that good advice was ignored because God wanted to bring Absalom to destruction. The winning game plan was in his hands, and he refused to follow it. As we come to 2 Samuel chapter 18, we find King David in the fight of his life. This shepherd who had faced bears and lions and giants and kings and enemy armies over the course of his lifetime now has to deal with his own family. His rebellious son, Absalom, who's attempted a coup, is still breathing down his neck. And the shepherd king has to decide, how will he proceed? Should he annihilate the enemy, knowing that the enemy is his own flesh and blood? Should he show mercy? And what would that look like, and how would that be received and understood by the nation as a whole? Is there any good outcome in this battle? Would it be better for David to simply surrender? Is there a good decision that could be made? As we look at the situation that David's facing, we're not sure. What would you do if you were King David? What would you decide to do? Now, granted, you're not going to face the same decisions that King David faced. You will never be, to my knowledge, king of an empire. By God's grace, you'll never have to deal with the fallout of rebellion and sin as King David did. And because you're not king of an empire or queen of an empire, you may not have to face a descendant who's planning a coup against you. But perhaps there are decisions that you do face. And everywhere you look, trying to make a decision, there doesn't seem to be a good outcome. No matter what you choose, something precious is going to be hurt. Something valuable is going to be lost. And you're not sure what to do. Yet, you still have to make a decision. So what do you do? What do you do? Well, as we look at 2 Samuel chapter 18 this morning, we're going to find that David's life teaches us a very simple principle. And that simple principle is this, that we're to face difficulty wisely. We're to face difficulty wisely. Well, how else would we face it? How else could we face it? How else should we? What does it mean to face difficulty wisely? David shows us at least 3 steps. I've been able to identify at least 3 steps this morning that David takes in wisely facing difficulty. So I would invite you to join me here in 2 Samuel chapter 18. We're going to start reading in verse 1 as we look at this first step to facing difficult decisions. David numbered the people who were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Then David sent out 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai, the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I also will surely go out with you myself. But the people answered, you shall not go out. For if we flee away, they will not care about us, nor if half of us die will they care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us now. For you are now more help to us in the city. Then the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. The first thing that David does is he's facing a difficult decision. The first thing that you can do as you face a difficult decision, number 1, minimize the danger. David is minimizing the danger. He's doing that by making careful preparations. He's making careful preparations. He divides his force. He's not sending them en masse into the fray. He's dividing them into 3 groups. He takes careful accounting so that he knows how many troops he has. He has a careful accounting so that in the future they can take account and know how many they've lost. They can gauge whether this campaign has been a success or not because they know what they had when they started. His friends that have reached him, Shobi and Machir,